One thing I get asked over and over is, what is fat over lean and how do I make sure I'm doing it? It's usually asked bashfully by a painter who feels like this was something they're supposed to have already known and mastered. But if only these painters knew just how common this question is, hopefully they wouldn't feel so embarrassed to ask. So today I'd like to set the record straight and give you what you need so that you can stop worrying about this fat over lean principle and just get back to painting. I want to talk about it with this particular painting because the stages of this painting coming together are actually quite clear. And you can actually go back after I've explained this and watch what it looks like for me to start with the paint being pretty lean and finish off the painting with the paint having a bit more fat or a bit more oil in it. So this was yet another daily painting from the January Strata Challenge. This was actually my day 2 painting back in January. And you can see an image of my still life setup on the left, and then my painting, of course, coming together on the right. And just in case you're looking at the subject and wondering what on earth that is, they are actually 2 riding spurs, complete with spur straps that are just hanging on a nail. For the January Strata Challenge, I was really interested in having a loose theme anyway. So I wanted there to be an equestrian theme and to use a lot of my old horseback riding stuff or like horse adjacent toys and just like things that I really treasured as a kid when I was riding horses. All right, so with that said, I hope you enjoy watching this painting coming together, and let's go ahead and get into the topic at hand. So to kick off, let's start by asking why fat over lean even matters. Basically, fat over lean is important because when oil paint dries, it actually isn't drying at all, but curing or polymerizing. This allows all of your layers of paint to bond together into a single stable paint film so that your painting can stand the test of time. Now, before I go any further, I should stop to point out that I am not a chemist. I'm just a person who has managed to stop feeling anxiety when I paint about making sure that I'm preserving fat over lean. And a lot of people have this fear that they're somehow breaking a painting rule whose purpose or value already felt kind of arbitrary or confusing, and that maybe they shouldn't even bother painting unless they're, quote, doing it right. I do not want that to stop people from painting, and I don't want people to feel intimidated by this. So in this video, I want to explain the very basics of what you need to understand and skip the things that you don't so that you too can stop worrying about this and just get to painting. Okay, so not a chemist, but because this is a chemical process that oil paint is going through, we need chemistry to be on our side, and this is where fat over lean comes in. So with that being said, let me take a stab at a very simple, non-technical explanation of what that means. Fat over lean is sometimes referred to as the flexible paint rule, and I think that actually may be an easier way to think about it. Basically, as the paint cures or hardens, you don't want the top layer to solidify first while the bottom layer is still in the middle of that curing process. So if you've ever baked like a pound cake, for instance, you can probably picture the beautiful crackly crust. That crust forms because as the cake starts to set, the outside actually sets first while the rest of the cake is baking and rising, and that causes those cracks to form in the crust. That might make for a beautiful pound cake, but I don't think many of us want that effect in our paintings because it would create cracks all throughout the paint. So it's important that the top layer of paint not solidify before the bottom layers have. And this is where fat over lean comes in. Basically, by having a higher oil content in the top layers of the painting, that oil actually promotes greater flexibility in the top of the painting and helps that top layer to avoid solidifying too quickly and cracking as the rest of the painting undergoes its curing process. That's that same cracking that you might love to see in a cake, but definitely don't want in your art. And that flexibility comes from slow drying additives like oil, which is a fat. Less flexibility happens when you have less oil, and perhaps use a different non-fatty, aka lean, additive such as solvent. So let's talk about which materials are fat and which are lean. Simply put, solvent is a non-fatty material that we can add to our paint, and medium is generally what we call an oily or fatty material that we can add. The most common medium is usually just a type of oil, so linseed, walnut, safflower, poppy oil, even mediums like Oleogel or Gamblin's solvent-free gel medium. These are all basically oils. So when I talk about medium in this video, you can assume that I am generally referring to any kind of fatty additive that might make their way into your paint mixtures. And if I'm talking about solvent, I'm probably talking about Gamsol, but other odorless mineral spirits or turpentine would also count here. And these would be your lean paint additives. So with that in mind, let's talk about how we actually use fat over lean in our paintings. When I paint in any of my YouTube videos, you'll notice in most paintings that I begin with a super wet wash of paint, and you will see that in this video too if you happen to go back and watch the very beginning. This wash is always done with the help of solvent and not medium, because solvent is the leanest additive I can use. It's also the lowest layer of paint in the painting, which means I'm starting as lean as possible. That initial wash has a ton of solvent in it, to the point where the paint is largely transparent, and you'll never see me go that transparent again. One really big advantage of having that much solvent in the paint is that while it doesn't totally dry while I'm painting, that amount of solvent actually does help the paint set up quite a bit quicker. Definitely when you compare it to if I've added medium to the paint mixture. Having it dry quicker definitely helps me just to manage the painting a little bit easier, although it does also assist in this idea of flexibility as we build our painting up and the painting undergoes that curing process. All right, so after I have that initial wash down, as I go through and I continue to progress into the block-in of the painting, you'll notice that the paint has a pretty liquid consistency still. That's definitely what you're seeing at this stage of the painting. I wanted the paint to be able to cover the canvas, basically. And in order to do that, I wanted the paint to move really easily, and solvent can do a really good job of that. But one thing that distinguishes it from the initial wash is that it is a lot more opaque. This means that I'm using a lot less solvent, but I'm still using enough so that the paint moves the way that I want it to. So I am still using solvent, but it is in a lower quantity. And because there's already oil in our oil paint as it comes out of the tube, it means that that subsequent layer of paint is fatter than the initial wash, thus preserving fat over lean. Now, once we start progressing past this block-in, I generally back off the use of solvent and switch to adding medium to my paint. The amount of medium is usually determined by feel, but the best way I can describe it for this video is that I don't want it to feel runny or liquidy like the initial wash or block-in where I'm using solvent, but I do want it looser and softer than the consistency of paint straight out of the tube. I liken that consistency after I've added enough medium to something like mayonnaise. But what's important is that I can tell that the paint will glide smoothly once I put it on the canvas. If the paint is skipping over the texture of the linen or it isn't covering easily, this usually means I need to add more medium. And this is essentially the process that I use from there on out in the painting, which brings me to an important note. One really important thing to consider here is that you do not need to add more and more oil in every layer of paint. You simply can't have less oil than the layer before. So you could keep the oil concentration the same throughout several layers or throughout the whole painting. In my case, I keep that consistency throughout several layers after I make the switch from solvent to medium. Once the block-in is complete, I stop adding solvent to the paint mixture and add only medium to my paintings, and I generally add that in the same quantity. Now, one thing that's really important to note is that this is really important when you are intentionally working in layers, and that isn't actually how I paint, really, and probably isn't why you're here on this channel. So there's a common question that I want to speak to, which is it necessary to think about fat over lean if I'm painting alla prima? This, I think, can get a little bit tricky because just because you're painting alla prima doesn't mean you don't have layers of paint within the same painting. And I imagine, just like when I lay down an oil wash, that starts to dry really quickly, whereas subsequent layers of paint will dry more slowly in my paintings. You could argue that given that these all went down in like the same sitting, that everything's going to dry at the same rate, but I don't know that that's necessarily true. But here's what I will say. My understanding is that fat over lean is most important for painters deliberately working in layers, so indirect oil painters. But even alla prima painters sometimes revisit paintings after they've been sitting around for days or weeks or months, so I would encourage painters to get a basic understanding of fat over lean, adjust your paintings accordingly, and use that to give you permission to stop stressing out about it. So even if you're an alla prima painter, I would say I don't think ignorance, for lack of a better word, is really the answer. I would just use what we're talking about in this video to give you the confidence you need to go forward, trusting that your painting is probably going to hold together pretty well, all things considered. And then from there, don't worry about overthinking it. Plenty of painters have worked without a great understanding of how to create work that will stand the test of time or make a conservator's job easy. My attitude is, let's arm ourselves with the best knowledge we can, and then stop stressing out and just paint. We don't need to wait until we know that we're using all of the most archival or conservation-friendly tools and techniques in order to start creating. And on that note, some of you might be familiar with the materials information and technical resources for artists over at the University of Delaware. This is generally my go-to source for information about best practices for oil painting tools, materials, and techniques, so this was a source I wanted to reference when I was preparing for this video. And when I plugged fat over lean into their website's search engine, I came across an FAQ on their website and a common misconception that they wanted to speak to that went like this. I am a better painter than artist X, therefore I know more about materials and techniques than artist X. The FAQ responds by saying this. This argument comes from a place of ignorance and short-sightedness. Many phenomenal painters were poor technicians in terms of preservation strategies, and subsequently, their works are conservation nightmares. Turner, Sir Joshua Reynolds, and Albert Pinkham Ryder are just some of the more famous. Conversely, there have been many artists whose works were impeccably constructed using the best materials, which offer the world little in terms of artistic vision. While artistic vision, fame, and cultural relevance are completely separate criteria from sound technical practice, these are not mutually exclusive. Generally, the selection of better materials and strategies can allow for similar painterly effects without risking premature deterioration. All right, that was a long quote, so I'm going to link the FAQ page that I'm talking about here in the description below so that you can check that out. And if you find all of this interesting, definitely use this resource. But going back to this quote, I basically see this as giving us permission to not have it perfect, but instead encouraging us to use the best tools and practices to the best of our knowledge and ability. So if you're an oil painter, I would encourage you to try focusing on using solvent in the early stages of your painting and switching to an oil-based or fatty medium in later stages, and just generally to try and avoid reversing that order. If you're doing this much, I honestly think, as far as I can tell, you're in pretty good shape. One other thing I want to speak to before we wrap up the video is, does this work with every medium? So throughout the video, and I mentioned this earlier, my basic working assumption is that the medium you've been working from is basically straight oil. So linseed oil, walnut oil, or even something like Oleogel or Gamblin's solvent-free gel product. These are all basically entirely oil or entirely fat. But these aren't the only types of mediums that are out there. Two really common products are Liquin or Galkid, which both adjust the drying time of your paint, not to mention custom blended mediums such as 511 medium or a custom blend of a certain ratio of solvent to oil. Now, 511 medium, just in case you're curious, is 5 parts solvent. In this case, I'm pretty sure it has to be turpentine, to 1 part Damar varnish and 1 part linseed oil. And then I've heard of artists making custom blends of solvent and medium that might be something like 30% linseed oil to 70% solvent. And there are a ton of permutations all between these. So let's first talk about these custom blends. If you are using a medium that is a blend of a little bit of solvent and a little bit of your oil of choice, you have a couple of options. One, you could use this exactly the way I describe using medium all throughout this video, where at some point you make a switch from working primarily with solvent to primarily with medium. Or you could potentially have different medium mixtures that have varying degrees of oil to solvent in them. And you would just want to make sure that as you work through the painting successively, that your later layers of paint have a higher concentration of that oil in the medium mixture. Or at least not a lower concentration of oil relative to solvent. But if you are using a medium that changes the drying time of the paint, such as Liquin or Galkid, this can actually change your paint's flexibility without necessarily changing the fat content. So when I looked into using Liquin and how you incorporate that into working fat over lean, I saw it suggested that Liquin be added evenly throughout the painting to avoid issues as the painting cures. I didn't see any similar warnings for Galkid, but I can only assume a similar consideration would be logical. And I didn't see these off of the manufacturer's websites, but it does just kind of make sense. So I would advise you to either do some more research and see what you can find, or just be wary of using these and try and use them evenly rather than just assuming that they work one way or the other as far as fat over lean goes. That being said, I don't use these particular mediums very often, so if you have a lot of experience with either Liquin or Galkid, feel free to share what you've learned over the course of doing your own research in the comments. All right, and this wraps up the most common questions I get about working fat over lean. I hope this was really helpful and really gave you permission to just go about your paintings without stressing out about this, because you know the things that you need to do to make your paintings as archival as you can without overly stressing out about them. This is especially true if you're an alla prima painter, and of course over here on this channel I do specialize in alla prima painting. I am sure that there are a lot of really great resources that go much deeper in depth or talk more about the chemistry, specifically for painters for whom this is more important, including indirect painters. If you have any favorite resources around that you would like to share, please let us know. Share in the comments your favorite resources, especially for any indirect painters who might have stumbled upon this channel. As always, I want to thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you learned something, comment and let me know about your favorite resources, and subscribe and hit the bell icon if you haven't already so that you know whenever new videos come out. All right, and until next time, happy painting.